Hey, are you ready to grow your business? You have checked out the number one resource for business leaders, entrepreneurs, startup founders, and managers. And we're going to teach you how to grow and scale your business with real actionable steps. There's no fluff in this podcast. It's just good advice. Check out this episode. If you're a first-time listener, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. And if you enjoy this episode, leave us a 5-star review. On today's episode, we're talking about how important passion is in the entrepreneurial journey. Is it something fluffy, or is it actually something pretty mandatory for actually growing a meaningful, sustainable business? More in today's episode. Check it out. Here comes your good advice. Hey, thanks for checking out another episode of the Good Advice Podcast. I'm your host, and I appreciate you wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Thank you for checking out the podcast and listening to this episode. It's been a continual journey, continuing to hit record and ramble about the things that are related to business. And for those of you who have been part of the journey long term, I'm happy to know that the podcast has been helpful for you. And if you're just tuning in for the first time, this is a podcast where you heard the intro. There's not a lot of fluff here. We just really like to talk about the real, tangible, actionable stuff that's related to running a business. And one of the reasons why this was so important to me, one of the big reasons why I started this podcast, was because basically, whenever I started my business, I realized that there wasn't a lot of places where I could get the honest conversation on what does it really mean to run a business? Like, what if I don't have any customers, what's my next step? Like, if I'm overwhelmed, like, what do I do? Like, how do I create order and structure out of my business? It felt like a lot of the events that I went to were really pitch heavy. It felt like that, and I don't begrudge anyone for selling their expertise. In fact, more often than not, I find myself in conversations with gifted entrepreneurs who are a bit averse to selling, and who I'm sort of convincing, hey, yeah, you should both be an entrepreneur and do, whatever product or service you're thinking about, and also try to make as much money as you can in the process. There's nothing wrong with that. But despite that, I also remember starting my own business and feeling like, I don't know who to talk to about this. I don't know who to ask about this. And for the people who I was really feeling like had some insight, it really felt like there was a paywall keeping me from really digging into that knowledge, especially early on when I didn't have a lot of cash. So having said all that, thanks for tuning in today. And really what you can expect in today's episode, we're going to be diving into one of these topics that hopefully guides you in the right direction. And this podcast episode today is kind of born out of a conversation on people who are really excited and energized by the entrepreneurial journey. I'm probably more so talking to the person who is in that corporate lifestyle and is thinking about, I'm thinking about leaving it. I'm thinking about quitting it. And I want to start my dream of being my own boss, reporting to myself, making my own hours. And it's, I just can't do this anymore. Like, I'm in the grind, I'm in the weeds, I feel like I'm drowning even, or even, it might not even be something like that where it's someone who's burned. Could also be someone who you're saying, hey, you know what? I've done 20 years or I've done a decade or more in this industry. I feel like I really understand it. And I feel like I have a better upside. I feel like there's a bigger upside me just tracking along and getting after this myself rather than continuing to, bump the numbers of whatever company I'm working with. And then there's probably a third group too of people who are just like, I'm just bored and want to do something else. So whatever group you're in, these are really the people that I'm talking to today in today's episode. And for those of you who you're a more seasoned entrepreneur, you're on the journey, I think you're going to find today's episode pretty relatable. And I think a couple things that I say, you're going to be like, oh yeah, I definitely know that pain. So going back to those original groups, if you're listening to this episode and you're thinking, okay, I'm excited to be an entrepreneur. I'm excited to be a business owner. I don't want to get you jaded. I don't want to be cynical. I don't want to, make some joke about, okay, good luck. But I do want to talk about what are really the most important things you need to have on hand whenever you start your business. And I'm not talking about did you get your business registered? Did you get your business license? Do you understand quarterly taxes? These are the kinds of things that I'm not really referring to, the pure logistics of it. But I do want to sort of talk and dig into some things that if you are new to the journey or you're thinking about jumping in, something that might be pretty important to really not die as a new business owner. And this is so important because honestly, I'm trying to think about how to phrase this. Business success and entrepreneurship is so much less about having the $1 million idea, and it's all the more about innovating and revising your product or service to lock in more and more with what your customer ultimately wants. And this is something that typically takes time. When I say time, I've talked on the podcast quite a bit about the 10-year game. It usually takes several years to build the momentum your business needs. And so, all things said, this is a bit of a longer game than maybe you might realize, especially in today's social media culture that's very excited to talk about overnight success stories. And if you just do this one thing, it's so easy. Just send this email, just use this script, yada, yada, yada. And these are things that have probably excited you as a newer business owner that, it's probably things that have made you think, oh, wow, I really can quit my job tomorrow and on Monday, be building this 6 or 7 figure empire. Not necessarily. Now, I'm not saying it won't happen to you. I hope that it does. But it's like that old movie. I can't think of what it's called. It's the exception, not the rule. I think it's called He's Just Not That Into You. I think it's a chick flick, but there's this commonality in the movie of that's the exception. It's not the rule, pointing out that running and growing a business, it is the exception for someone to have an overnight success story. It's not the rule. It's not the rule of the game. More importantly, we absolutely love survivorship bias. And so we often cling to the story of someone who made it, who, against all odds, they made it happen. Maybe they made it happen faster than anyone else in their industry. And so we cling to that story and we think, yeah, I can do that, without realizing that this is one business out of 25, 30 others that miserably failed and bankrupted whoever that person was who was starting the business. So I don't say all this to freak you out, but I am setting the stage, so to speak, to help you understand really the longevity of this process you're getting into. Now, I mentioned at the start of the episode, like this podcast itself is kind of born out of this conversation with newer business owners where I see this on social media. I talk to business owners who talk about this, but it's people who they love the entrepreneurial idea. And the very next thing they say is, what business should I start? What business should I start? Maybe that just needs to be the name of this podcast episode. I don't know, but it's this question that I hear again and again and again. And it's, I have a certain number of cash, a certain amount of cash. I'm quitting my job, or I want to quit my job. Now, what's the business? What do I need to do? And it's a bit interesting to me because it's kind of like I envision someone buying a lotto ticket and asking the cashier, what numbers should I use? Because there's really no tried and true business that you're going to choose that's going to guarantee your success in entrepreneurship. Now, I'm not saying there aren't some things you can do to make your likelihood of surviving significantly higher than your competition or those who've come before you, and we'll talk about that. But I just want you to know that there is no single business. There is no single industry that will guarantee you success on this journey. The sooner you realize that, and the sooner you have realistic expectations, frankly, the easier you're going to go on yourself. Meaning, when you have that first setback, you're less likely to beat yourself up because you start to realize, this was my problem, was I was 3, 4, 5 months in and I wasn't $1 million business owner. And I was thinking like, what's wrong with me? Like, what's happening here? Rather than just digging into who's my customer, what am I solving for these are the actual like mechanical things with business, with sales even, that would have been a lot more meaningful for my business if I had dug into those things earlier than later. So moving right along here, these are things that really just having the right perspective, it's important for the health of you as an entrepreneur or as a business owner. But I talk to people who they ask this question, what do I start? What should I do? And I've already mentioned it's kind of a silly question. And there's really two things that matter for a person who is looking to build a sustainable business. I think one, it's someone who has to have expertise in the industry that they are looking to get into. This seems a bit common sense, but you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't be surprised, I don't know, how many times I talk to people who they say, hey, I've always wanted to open a restaurant. I've always wanted to open a restaurant. I think I'm going to open a restaurant. Okay, well, do you have any experience working in a restaurant? No. Okay. Do you know anything about restaurants? Have you talked to anyone? You have a friend who runs a restaurant? No. Why do you want to run a restaurant? I don't know. It sounds like it'd be a lot of fun. Okay, well, it's one of the most cash-intense businesses that there is, and we're coming into I guess we're in a post-COVID world where, I don't know. I frankly, I don't know what like the tourism or like the, eating out industry is looking like right now. It's probably not as booming as it was in 2019. So, it's like all these red flags get checked and you're like, okay, you're someone, you have no experience whatsoever in this industry and you're hoping it's going to be successful. The odds of survival are not looking good. So I typically tell people, hey, this needs to be an industry that you understand, because if you can already step into a product or service where you already understand your customer, meaning, and I don't mean like, because this is also what drives me crazy. It's like the person who's like, oh, I just so get like, it's such an obvious solution. It's such a meaningful solution. And yet no one's buying it because the customers don't see it as a solution. They don't see it as meaningful. And it's an ego-driven founder who's just high on their product. But someone who's been working in industry, who's already sold to customers, they know that customer inside and out. They know the pain that customer, they could describe that pain to a random stranger. And if their customer was listening in, for the customer to say, yeah, that's exactly right. Like, holy crap, like, you know me exactly. Like, for someone to know their industry, that person is going to be infinitely more successful than someone who doesn't, because they're skipping so many steps. Your path to success is going to be so much quicker than the brand new, naive, aspiring entrepreneur. So I think these things are kind of obvious, but there's this other piece that I think it also feels a little obvious, but I've seen people talk it down in the sense of, oh, it's not really that important. It's not really a big deal. That's just fluff. And it's kind of rare for me to talk about this because a lot of what I do talk about is very practically driven. It's less emotional. It's less, mental concepts. I'm not a life coach. I'm not let's just talk it through. It's more like, okay, let's build the strategy and let's do it, right? So this concept that I want to dig into, it's a little unusual for me, and it does have some fluff to it, but I've just been really thinking about this a lot over the last really just couple of weeks, actually. And I think to run and grow a meaningful business, you have to have passion. I think it's not just passion for the game, I guess, passion for what entrepreneurship is, but also passion for your product or service. And these aren't the same passion, by the way. Like the life of entrepreneurship, I was talking to someone, I've told the story a million times, but it was a younger guy where he was like, I so badly want to be an entrepreneur. And I was like, okay, what do you think that means? Because he had so much zest around this term that I thought, okay, there's a lot attached in his mind to this. So I said, what do you think that word means, entrepreneur? And he says, oh, it's amazing. I mean, you can sleep in as late as you want and no one tells you what to do. And I thought to myself, it kind of sounds like immaturity because that's not the entrepreneur life that I know. I mean, sure, I don't have a boss, but I'm reporting to my customers. I'm gathering their feedback. My wife is, obviously vested in my financial well-being. So I'm keeping her in the loop as to what's happening with the business. And I'm definitely not sleeping in as late as I want. In fact, I'll go ahead and tell you, I'm pretty much tired all the time, pretty much exhausted all the time. And I mean, part of that is because I have a toddler. So I think that's the bigger side of it. But, you don't say, I'm going to become an entrepreneur. And it's like, oh, this is awesome. I went from 40 hours a week and now I'm down to 20 hours a week, or I work just 10 hours a week. Or what's that book, the entrepreneurship book, The 4-Hour Workweek, which I'm not knocking the book. If you love it, if it's on your mantle, I'm not attacking you, but you're not going to quit your corporate job and start a 4-hour work week the next week. If you do, again, it's the exception, not the rule. Which again, the implicit message there is that you are not the exception. So try to resist being that person who says, okay, yeah, but that will be me. Okay. Again, I hope it will be, but it probably won't be. All this to say, you are probably going to quit your job working 40 hours a week or 35 hours a week and be inundated with thoughts around bills, health insurance, customers. Where's my next customer? If you have employees, payroll. Am I going to make payroll? The mechanics of running a business, like automating things, processes, protocols. All of this on top of being the face of your business. I mean, there's a lot happening there, and you're probably going to be working, I would guess, probably upwards, if not at least 40, I would say upwards to 60 hours a week, most likely. That's pretty common for a new business owner. And you're going to experience incredible setbacks. You're going to experience thinking your business is going one direction and then it changes entirely, either because of a customer that you thought you did a great job with who let you know that you didn't, or maybe the economy changes. You open a restaurant and you really feel like you get restaurants, and then COVID happens and now your restaurant's closed and you have $50,000 in debt. You get a bad review. You get a bad review from someone that you're pretty sure isn't even your customer. Which, by the way, I'm not like, if in case you're wondering, I'm not like projecting my own, life struggles here. I've talked to so many business owners, and I don't know if I'm a magnet for this or what, but without sounding negative or pessimistic, 9 times, or I'd say it's probably too much, 7 times out of 10, most of my conversations are, with people who they've experienced like a really tough setback. They're like, yeah, life is really hard right now. Like, this is not what I thought it would be. This is not what I expected it to be. I mean, even giving a personal story, I have had customers in the past or sales in the past where I knew it was a done deal. Like, I knew it was a done deal, and then it wasn't. And then it suddenly disappeared, and you were counting on that cash for a big bill coming up, maybe your mortgage, or maybe you were gonna, like redo your website, or you were going to buy something, or who knows what, and the sale fell through. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. I mean, you hire an employee, and it all makes sense, and it feels good, and it looks good, and then all of a sudden, 2 weeks in, that employee says, "Hey, we're moving. Sorry, I gotta quit." And all that time and effort that you put into hiring someone you now feel like, okay, I just wasted this. I'm still losing money from this position not being filled, and now I just wasted, 2 weeks training someone. Or you hire someone and they're not a good fit and you have to fire them, and it's awkward and uncomfortable and it's painful and, all these other things. And, again, I'm not trying to air grievances that come with running a business, but if you are under the impression that it is easy or simple, or this is your early retirement, I'll go ahead and tell you are living on another planet. It is certainly not that way. It is, frankly, the hardest thing I have ever done. And that is a similar comment that I've heard from other entrepreneurs that I really trust. It's a journey. It's challenging. It's tough. And because of all of these things that can be setbacks, that can be challenging, that can be life questioning in the sense of like, what is my identity? What's my purpose? Am I even doing the right thing? I think you have to have passion for what you do. I think you have to have passion for the entrepreneurial game, like for the lifestyle, like being quick on your feet, agile, like being comfortable with that. But I think you have to also be passionate for what you sell. Because if you're not passionate about it, then when all of these things pop up, and sometimes they pop up in combination one after another, or they pop up, again and again and again, if you don't have passion, because it's a 10-year game, because it's a long game, you're not going to have the endurance. You're not going to have the resiliency to not throw in the towel, to say, screw this. Like, why am I wasting? I'll go back and do, whatever job I was doing before. It's why more often than not, when I talk to entrepreneurs who have built their successful business, more often than not, I hear less and less about themselves. Like when I talk to a brand new entrepreneur and I'm like, why do you want to be an entrepreneur? I hear a lot about like, oh, I'm so passionate about this. I'm really excited about it. This is going to be really awesome for my family. Like I have this really awesome idea. And these are all okay comments, by the way. But I've noticed a difference in people who have created successful businesses. When you ask them about the game, the entrepreneurial game, what I actually hear most often are stories about their customers, what they've done for their customers, the sense of fulfillment they had in serving a customer. Like their head hits the pillow and they realize, I did something meaningful. Like I affected someone else's life. Even if it was a small product or service, you don't have to do something like, you don't have to have like some life altering thing. But yeah, the answer that I provided as a seller, that was a good answer. It was an answer that they could trust and can rely on. And it made their life just a little bit easier. Like these are the stories that I hear from people. And when I hear those stories, I realize, passion for your customer, for serving your customer, for making sure what you sell actually does what you say it does, and that it's not about, I made this sale, now let me move on to the next sale, whether or not, it's like that churn and burn of customers. Like, if they didn't like it, oh well. But like, I'm making sure that I'm selling what I say I'm selling and that it does what I say it does. Like those are the people who can stand the test of time, who can stand the turbulence and the trials of life that gets thrown at you, sometimes at crazy intense speeds. And it lets you weather the storm that sometimes you're in for months at a time without even seeing any possibility for getting out of it. And then you finally do. And you look back, and this is the other thing that's a bit obnoxious. People who tell the 10-year overnight success story. But you look back and you realize, yeah, we've built something meaningful. We have built something tangible. And it didn't happen overnight. It took a lot of grit. It took a lot of resiliency. And it took a lot of passion to keep after it, even when it seemed impossible. So I encourage you, find that passion and protect that passion. Steward it so you don't let it go. Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, I appreciate you checking out the podcast. We update the podcast a few times a week. If you enjoyed this episode, you want to talk about the episode, I'd love to get your feedback. You can email me, blake@goodadvicecoaching.com, or you can leave a review on the podcast. And hey, if you want to support the podcast, you can do that at our Patreon, patreon.com/goodadvice. I so appreciate you, and I'll catch you later. That's today's good advice. See ya.